The massive chamber of the Galactic Council floated in the void of space like a giant crystal sphere filled with swirling lights and colors. The walls were made of pure energy that shifted and moved, creating patterns that hurt the eyes of most species, but the beings inside were used to such wonders. They had built this place to show their power and their ability to survive anything the galaxy could throw at. Then 12 different alien races sat around the enormous circular table each one more impressive and terrifying than the last. Their yearly meeting was the most important event in this part of the galaxy, where they would share stories of their greatest survival challenges and prove once again why they ruled the stars. The air buzzed with excitement, and the smell of different alien atmospheres mixed together in a cocktail that would kill most life forms. Commander Vextar of the Crystalline Horde was the first to stand, and his body caught the light from 100 different sources. His entire form was made of living crystal that had grown over millions of years of evolution on a world where everything was sharp and deadly. The crystals that made up his body were harder than diamond and could cut through steel like butter, but even his incredible natural armor showed the scars of his greatest achievement. He raised one crystal arm high above his head, and the room fell silent as everyone waited to hear his tale. The other aliens leaned forward in their seats, knowing that Vextar never disappointed when it came to stories of survival and danger. His voice was like the sound of wind chimes in a storm, musical but with an edge of danger that made everyone listen carefully. "I have walked on Shatter Prime," he announced, and his crystal body began to glow brighter with each word. "For 3 days and 3 nights, I survived the glass storms that tear apart mountains and turn the very air into razors. The winds on that cursed world reach 800 kilometers per hour, and every breath you take fills your lungs with crystal dust that cuts from the inside." The other aliens nodded with respect because they had all heard of Shatter Prime. It was a world where the entire surface was made of different types of crystal that had been growing and fighting each other for billions of years. The storms on that world were legendary, even among the most dangerous places in the galaxy. Most species would die within minutes of landing there. Vextar continued. His story and his crystal form began to shift and change, showing the scars he had received during his ordeal. Razor-sharp fragments the size of spears flew through the air like bullets, and I had to dodge them while finding shelter in caves that were constantly collapsing. The very ground beneath my feet was trying to slice through my crystal skin, and more than once I felt death breathing down my neck. He showed them a particularly deep scar that ran across his chest where a massive crystal spear had nearly pierced his heart. The wound had healed over the centuries, but it still glowed with a different color than the rest of his body, proving that even his incredible regenerative abilities had been pushed to their limits on that nightmare world. "But I did not just survive," he said with growing pride. "I hunted the crystal wolves that live in the deepest caves, creatures made of pure living glass that can move faster than the eye, can follow their howls, can shatter rock in their bite, can cut through anything. But I tracked them through the maze like caverns and claimed their crystal hearts as trophies." The room erupted in impressed murmurs, and several aliens clicked or whistled their approval. Crystal wolves were legendary creatures that most species only knew from ancient stories. To actually hunt one was considered impossible, and Vextar claimed to have killed several during his 3-day ordeal on Shatter Prime. Captain Mordun of the Flame Walkers laughed heartily, and his red scales began to glow brighter with amusement. His people had evolved on worlds that were constantly exploding with volcanic activity, and his natural resistance to heat and toxic gases was legendary throughout the galaxy. He stood up slowly, and his massive form cast shadows across the crystal chamber. "Your crystal world sounds cold and boring compared to Inferno 7, he boomed, and his voice was like the rumble of an active volcano. "I spent 2 full weeks on that world of eternal fire, where the temperature never drops below 200 degrees and the very air can melt flesh from bone. The rivers run with molten rock instead of water, and the rain is liquid metal that falls from clouds of pure sulfur." Several aliens shuddered at the description because Inferno 7 was famous for being one of the most hostile worlds ever discovered. The volcanic activity there was so intense that the entire planet was basically one giant eruption that had been going on for millions of years, most species would be vaporized instantly just from entering the atmosphere. More. Dunn spread his arms wide and his scales glowed even brighter as he warmed to his story. The native fire lizards on that world are bigger than most spacecraft, and they breathe flames hot enough to turn rock into gas, but I hunted them through the lava tubes and fought them in battles that shook the very foundations of the planet. Their blood is pure molten metal, and when you kill one, the explosion can be seen from orbit. He pulled out a small vial filled with what looked like liquid fire that swirled and moved on its own. "This is fire lizard blood," he announced, "and even contained in this special crystal, it is still hot enough to melt through most metals. I collected it while dodging eruptions that could destroy entire moons and breathing air that would cook the lungs of lesser species." The other council members were clearly impressed because fire lizard blood was one of the most valuable and dangerous substances in the galaxy. To collect it meant getting close enough to one of the most dangerous predators in known space and surviving the incredible heat and toxic environment of Inferno 7. Queenzill era of the insectoid swarm clicked her mandibles together in what passed for laughter among her people. Her exoskeleton was black as space and covered in spikes that dripped with various toxins that her body produced naturally. Her compound eyes reflected the light in thousands of different directions, making it impossible to tell where she was actually looking. "You both speak of worlds that are merely uncomfortable," she said, and her voice was like the buzzing of a million angry insects. "I have spent a full month on corrosion Delta, where the very air eats flesh from bone and the rain is pure acid that can dissolve anything weaker than my natural armor. The swamps on that world are filled with creatures whose blood is sulfuric acid and whose breath can melt steel." She gestured with one of her razor-sharp claws, and a holographic image appeared in the center of the table, showing a world that looked like a nightmare come to life. The entire surface was covered in bubbling swamps that gave off toxic fumes, and the sky was the color of old blood. Everything in the image looked dangerous and deadly. Even the plants seemed to move with predatory intent. "My exoskeleton was eaten away layer by layer," she continued, "but my regenerative abilities kept pace with the damage. Barely. The acid creatures that live in those swamps attacked me constantly because they could sense that I was not from their world. They came at me in waves, trying to dissolve me from the outside, while the toxic atmosphere tried to kill me from within." The room was completely silent now as the other aliens tried to imagine surviving in such a hostile environment. Corrosion Delta was legendary for being completely uninhabitable by most galactic standards. The idea of spending a month there was almost beyond belief even for the hardened survivors of the Galactic Council. But the most dangerous part was not the environment or the creatures, she said with obvious pride. It was collecting the rare minerals that grow only in the deepest parts of the acid swamps. These crystals can only form in conditions that would kill almost any life form, and they dissolve instantly if removed from their toxic environment. I had to create special containers while fighting off the native life forms and constantly regenerating my damaged body. As each alien finished their tale, the competition grew more intense, with each species trying to outdo the others, with increasingly dangerous worlds and more impossible survival stories. The council chamber filled with the sounds of different alien languages as they discussed and compared their achievements. They were the elite survivors of the galaxy, the species that had conquered the most dangerous worlds and lived to tell about it. No challenge was too great, no world too hostile for these incredible beings. They had faced death on 1,000 different worlds and emerged victorious every single time. Then the chamber doors opened with a soft hiss and everything changed forever. The figure that walked through the massive chamber doors was nothing like what the Galactic Council expected to see. The being was small, barely reaching 2 meters in height, and moved with a strange, fluid grace that seemed completely out of place among the armored giants that filled the room. His skin was a pale, pinkish color that looked soft and vulnerable without any visible natural protection or weapons. Commander Vextar turned his crystalline head to examine this newcomer, and his entire body dimmed with confusion. Where were the natural armor plates that every sensible species had developed? Where were the claws or fangs or poison glands that marked a true survivor? This creature looked like it had never faced a single day of real danger in its entire existence. The human introduced himself as Day One Kim, and his voice was surprisingly calm and steady despite Being surrounded by some of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, he carried only a simple pack on his back, and wore clothes made of some strange soft material that looked like it would tear apart at the first sign of trouble, Captain. Dunn let out a rumbling laugh that echoed through the chamber, and his red scales flickered with amusement. This has to be some kind of joke, he muttered to the alien sitting next to him. Look at that soft pink skin, it would burn away in seconds on any real Deathworld. And those tiny hands with no claws, how does it even feed itself? The other council members began to whisper among themselves in their various alien languages, but the meaning was clear in every tone. They were looking at what appeared to be the weakest, most pathetic creature any of them had ever encountered. This being looked like it belonged in some protected garden world, not in a gathering of elite survivors. Queen Zil Era clicked her mandibles together as she studied. Day one, with her compound eyes, she had seen many different life forms during her travels across the galaxy, but never anything quite this fragile looking. Her own exoskeleton could stop projectile weapons, and her natural toxins could kill most creatures with a single touch. This human had none of these obvious advantages. The human seemed completely unaware of the mocking attention he was receiving. Instead, he calmly walked to an empty space at the council table and stood there waiting patiently for someone to acknowledge his presence. His behavior was strange because most creatures would show some sign of fear or submission when faced with such obviously superior predators. Several of the alien council members exchanged glances that clearly said the same thing. How had this weak creature even survived long enough to reach adulthood, let alone travel through space to attend their elite gathering? It defied everything they understood about survival and evolution. One of the smaller council members, a being that looked like a cross between a spider and a scorpion, leaned over to whisper to his neighbor, "This must be what happens when a species evolves on a paradise world with no real dangers. They become soft and weak because they never face any real challenges." The whispering grew louder as more aliens joined the conversation, speculating about where this strange being could have possibly come from. Some suggested it might be from one of the protected garden worlds that existed under the care of more advanced species. Others wondered if it was some kind of artificial creation that had never faced natural selection. Commander Vex Tar finally spoke up, his crystal voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade through silk. "What world do you claim to represent, creature, and what possible survival story could you share with beings who have conquered the most dangerous places in the galaxy?" Day one looked up at the towering crystal being without any sign of intimidation. His expression remained calm and neutral, as if he was discussing the weather rather than standing before creatures that could kill him in dozens of different ways. "I represent Earth," he said simply, and his voice carried a quiet confidence that seemed completely at odds with his fragile appearance. The name meant nothing to any of the council members. They had explored thousands of worlds across the galaxy and cataloged countless different environments, but Earth was not in any of their databases. It was probably some unknown backwater planet that had only recently achieved space travel. Captain Dunn leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the small human. "And what dangers does this Earth supposedly contain?" he asked with obvious sarcasm. "What terrible challenges have you faced that could possibly compare to the crystal storms of Shatter Prime or the volcanic hellscapes of Inferno 7? Several other aliens chuckled at the question because they were genuinely curious to hear what this soft-looking creature would claim as a dangerous environment. They expected to hear about mild weather patterns or perhaps some small predators that could be easily avoided. Day one was quiet for a long moment, as if he was carefully considering how to explain something very complex to beings who might not understand. Then he began to speak, and his words would change everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about survival. "My world," he said slowly, "is covered 70% by a liquid that kills most galactic species within minutes of contact. The gravity is nearly twice what most of you consider survivable, and the atmospheric pressure would crush beings adapted to lower pressure environments." The laughter in the chamber began to die away as the aliens processed these words. "A world covered in deadly liquid with crushing gravity and dangerous atmospheric pressure." That actually sounded legitimately hostile, not like the paradise world they had imagined. "But that is only the beginning," Day one continued. "The oxygen levels in our atmosphere are so high that many species would suffer toxic poisoning within hours. The temperature swings across our planet range from 50 degrees below freezing to over 70 degrees above, and our weather systems regularly produce winds that exceed 300 kilometers per hour. Queen Zill Era stopped clicking her mandibles as she realized that these conditions actually sounded worse than many of the Deathworlds. She knew about a world with such extreme temperature variations and toxic atmosphere levels would indeed be challenging for most species to survive. The life forms that share my world, Day One said with the same calm tone, include predators that hunt in coordinated packs across hundreds of kilometers, massive creatures that weigh over 300 kilograms and can run faster than most vehicles, and ocean predators that are perfectly designed killing machines unchanged for millions of years. Commander Vex Tar crystal form began to dim as he processed this information. Predators that could coordinate over vast distances and ocean killers that had achieved evolutionary perfection. These were not the harmless creatures they had expected to hear about. Our planet experiences regular catastrophic weather events. Day One continued. Rotating storm systems with winds that can level entire cities, electrical storms that generate billions of volts of energy, and seasonal changes that can vary by 80 degrees Celsius across the surface. The chamber was growing quieter as more aliens began to pay serious attention to what the human was saying. These were not the mild environmental challenges of a garden world. These sounded like the conditions found on legitimate death worlds. And then there are the microscopic threats, Day One said, and his voice carried just a hint of something that might have been amusement. Organisms too small to see that can invade other life forms and kill them from within. Parasites that can control the minds of their hosts, and poisonous life forms that can kill with a single touch. The silence in the chamber was now complete as every alien focused their attention on the small human, who had just described environmental conditions that sounded worse than many of the worlds they had boasted about. Surviving this was not what any of them had expected to hear. Day One looked around the circle of alien faces, and for the first time since entering the chamber he smiled. It was not a threatening expression, but somehow it made several of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy feel distinctly uncomfortable. And all of this, he said quietly, is what my species considers normal everyday living conditions. The silence that followed Day One words was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever experienced. These were beings who had faced the worst the galaxy could offer and lived to tell about it, but now they sat frozen in their seats as the true horror of what they had just heard began to sink into their minds. Commander Vex Tar was the first to find his voice, and when he spoke his crystal form flickered uncertainly. You cannot be serious, he said, but there was no longer any mockery in his tone. A world covered in liquid that kills most species, that level of environmental hostility would make colonization impossible for most galactic civilizations. Day One nodded calmly as if discussing something completely normal. Water makes up about 70% of Earth's surface, and while my species has adapted to it, most alien biologies would find it highly corrosive. The hydrogen and oxygen molecules bond in ways that can break down cellular structures that did not evolve in similar conditions. The human paused and looked around the chamber at the various alien faces that were staring at him with growing alarm. But water is actually one of the less dangerous aspects of my world. The real challenges come from everything else that lives there, and the environmental conditions that change constantly. Captain Moore Dunn leaned forward, his red scales no longer glowing with amusement, but with something that looked more like concern. You mentioned predators, he said slowly. What kind of creatures are we talking about? Surely they cannot be more dangerous than the fire lizards of Inferno. 7A small smile crossed Day One face, and several aliens noticed that his teeth were flat and white, completely unsuited for tearing flesh like proper predator teeth. On Earth we have creatures called sharks, he began, and they have remained essentially unchanged for over 400 million years because they achieved evolutionary perfection as killing machines. He gestured as if describing something in the air before him. Great white sharks can grow over 6 meters long and weigh more than 2 tons. They can detect a single drop of blood in the water from several kilometers away, and their bite force exceeds 18,000 1,000 newtons per square inch. Their teeth are designed to slice through bone, and they replace them constantly throughout their lives. Queen Zil-Era mandibles clicked nervously as she processed this information. A predator that had remained unchanged for hundreds of millions of years meant it had achieved a level of deadly efficiency that evolution could not improve upon. That was actually terrifying from a biological standpoint, but sharks only live in the water. Day one continued. On land we have pack hunters called wolves that can track prey across hundreds of kilometers using scent alone. They coordinate their attacks with complex social structures and can bring down prey many times larger than themselves through teamwork and persistence. The aliens exchanged worried glances because pack hunting behavior was one of the most dangerous predator strategies in the galaxy. Individual strength was one thing, but coordinated group attacks were exponentially more deadly than there are the big cats. Day one said, and his voice remained conversational despite describing creatures that would terrify most galactic species. Tigers that can leap horizontally for over 9 meters and vertically for over 3 meters. They are perfectly silent. Stalkers that can kill prey with a single bite to the neck, and they are strong enough to drag kills that weigh more than they do up into tree. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they tried to imagine predators with such incredible physical capabilities. The idea of a creature that could leap 9 meters and kill with a single bite was genuinely frightening, even to beings who had faced crystal wolves and fire lizards, and these are just the large, obvious predators. Day one continued. There are also creatures like polar bears that can weigh over 800 kilograms and survive in environments cold enough to freeze most alien species. Solid brown bears that can run over 50 kilometers per hour despite their massive size and have been known to fight off multiple attackers simultaneously. Commander Vextar, crystal form, was now barely glowing as he struggled to process the information. A single predator weighing 800 kilograms that could move at 50 kilometers per hour was beyond the capabilities of most species to handle, even with advanced technology. But the really dangerous creatures on Earth are often the smallest ones, Day one said, and there was something in his tone that made every alien in the chamber pay closer attention. We have spiders whose venom can kill a creature my size in minutes. Snakes that can strike faster than the eye can follow, with toxins that shut down nervous systems instantly. He paused and looked around the chamber at the increasingly worried alien faces. Mosquitoes that can carry diseases capable of killing millions. Ticks that can transfer infections that cause permanent neurological damage. Wasps that can sting repeatedly and call for reinforcements using chemical signals. Queen Zil-Era, who prided herself on being a master of toxins and biological warfare, found herself genuinely disturbed by these descriptions. A world where even the smallest creatures carried deadly poisons and diseases was a nightmare beyond anything she had encountered. The weather patterns on Earth are equally hostile. Day one continued, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. We have storm systems called hurricanes that can generate winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour with enough energy to power major cities. These storms can be over 1,000 kilometers in diameter and last for weeks. Captain Moore Dunn, who had survived the volcanic hellscapes of Inferno 7, felt his confidence shaking as he realized that Earth weather systems sounded more dangerous than anything he had faced. Storms 1,000 kilometers across with 300 kilometer per hour winds were beyond the scale of most planetary weather. Tornadoes are smaller but more concentrated, Day one said calmly. They can generate winds exceeding 500 kilometers per hour in a focused column that can lift objects weighing several tons and hurl them for kilometers. The pressure differential can make buildings explode from the inside. The chamber was now completely silent except for the various breathing sounds of different alien species trying to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about dangerous environments. Lightning storms turn our sky into a battlefield of pure electrical energy. Day one continued with billions of volts discharged in single strikes that can superheat the air to temperatures exceeding 30,000 degrees Celsius. These storms can produce hundreds of lightning strikes per minute across areas spanning thousands of square kilometers. Several aliens made involuntary sounds of distress as they tried to imagine an environment where the very sky regularly attacked the surface with billions of volts of electricity. The idea of living under such conditions seemed impossible. And then there are the seasonal changes, Day 1 said. Temperature variations that can range from minus 50 degrees Celsius to plus 50 degrees Celsius across the planet's surface regions, where the difference between summer and winter temperatures exceeds 80 degrees. Ice ages that can last for thousands of years, followed by warming periods that melt continental ice sheets. Commander Vextar found his voice again, but it was barely a whisper. How does anything survive on such a world, he asked. The environmental pressures alone should have prevented complex life from ever developing. Day 1 smiled again, and this time several aliens noticed that, despite having flat herbivore teeth, there was something predatory about his expression. That is exactly what my species learned to overcome, he said quietly. We did not just survive Earth, we conquered every environment it could throw at us. The terrible truth was beginning to dawn on the assembled council members. This was not a weak species from a garden world. This was something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The realization hit the Galactic Council like a physical blow, and the chamber that had been filled with boastful laughter just minutes before was now heavy with a silence that felt almost oppressive. Every alien present was forced to confront a truth that shattered their understanding of what it meant to be a survivor in the galaxy. Commander Vextar crystal form continued to dim as he processed the full implications of what Day 1 had described his greatest achievement. Surviving 3 days on Shatter Prime suddenly seemed like a brief vacation compared to living permanently on a world where every single day brought new threats that could kill without warning. The glass storms that had nearly destroyed his crystalline body were predictable events that happened in specific locations at certain times. The razor-sharp fragments that had scarred him were visible threats that could be dodged or blocked with skill and courage, but Earth sounded like a world where death could come from anywhere at any time in forms too small to see or too large to fight. I have spent my entire existence preparing for extreme environments, he said slowly, his voice like breaking crystal. But your world makes our greatest challenges sound like minor inconveniences. The storms of Shatter Prime last for days and then they end. But you describe conditions that never stop changing, never give respite, never allow a moment of true safety. Captain Moore Dunred's scales had lost their fiery glow entirely as he struggled to compare his achievements with the everyday reality of human existence on Inferno 7. The dangers were obvious and could be prepared for, he admitted. Reluctantly, the volcanic eruptions follow patterns. The fire lizards have territories. The temperature is constant, even if it is deadly. He gestured helplessly with his massive clawed hands. But your world sounds like it combines every type of environmental hazard simultaneously: crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, extreme temperature variations, massive predators, microscopic killers, and weather systems that dwarf anything we have ever encountered. The other aliens around the table were having similar revelations as they compared their greatest survival stories with what appeared to be normal Tuesday afternoon conditions on Earth. A world where hurricanes, tornadoes, lightning storms, and blizzards were just background environmental conditions seemed impossible. Queen Zil Ara, who had spent a month on corrosion Delta fighting acid-breathing creatures while her exoskeleton slowly dissolved, found herself genuinely disturbed by the scope of Earth dangers, at least on corrosion Delta. The threats were biological, she said, her mandibles clicking nervously. The acid creatures were dangerous, but they were still just creatures that could be fought and killed. She paused and looked directly at Day 1 with her compound eyes. But you describe a world where the environment itself is actively hostile, where the very air and water and weather are constantly trying to kill everything that lives there. How does any species develop intelligence under such conditions? Most creatures would spend all their energy just trying to survive. That was exactly the point. Day 1 replied, and for the first time his calm demeanor showed a hint of something deeper, perhaps pride mixed with a kind of grim satisfaction. Every human who reaches adulthood has already survived challenges that would kill most galactic species. Before they could even begin to adapt, he looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens who were slowly beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were dealing with. We did not evolve natural armor like Commander Vextar because the threats on Earth changed too quickly for any single defense to be effective. We did not develop resistance to specific toxins like Queensill era because Earth produces thousands of different poisons and diseases. The human paused in his expression. Grew thoughtful. We did not evolve to handle extreme heat like Captain Moore done because Earth temperatures vary so widely that no single adaptation would work. Instead, we developed something much more dangerous than any physical trait. Several aliens leaned forward despite their growing unease because they needed to understand. What could possibly be more valuable than natural weapons and armor in such a hostile environment? We developed intelligence, Day, one said simply, and the ability to adapt our behavior and technology to any challenge. Earth taught us that the environment will always change, that new threats will always emerge, and that survival depends not on being perfectly adapted to one situation but on being able to adapt quickly to any situation. Commander Vextar crystal form flickered as he processed this information. Intelligence as a survival trait was not unknown in the galaxy, but most species used it to enhance their natural abilities rather than replace them entirely. The idea of a species that relied almost entirely on adaptability rather than physical prowess was genuinely alien to their way of thinking. More importantly, Day One continued, we learned to work together in ways that most species never develop. Individual humans are indeed fragile compared to your impressive physical capabilities, but humans never travel alone. We bring our entire species accumulated knowledge and technology with us wherever we go. The aliens exchanged glances as they began to understand the implications. A species that shared information and resources on a planetary scale would indeed be formidable, even if individual members were physically weak. The collective intelligence of billions of survivors could overcome challenges that would defeat even the strongest individual when a human encounters a new environment. Day One explained, we do not need to evolve new biological adaptations over thousands of generations. We study the challenges, analyze the threats, and develop technological solutions within years or even months. We turn our greatest weakness, our individual fragility, into our greatest strength through cooperation. Queen Zillera mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this concept. Her own species were individual hunters who occasionally worked in small groups, but the idea of planetary-scale cooperation was almost beyond her comprehension. How do you coordinate the efforts of billions of individuals, she asked. How do you share information across an entire world? Day One smiled and pulled a small device from his pocket. This is a communication device that connects to a global network. Every human can access the accumulated knowledge of our entire species instantly. We can coordinate activities across the entire planet, communicate with individuals on the other side of our world, and share new discoveries with everyone simultaneously. The device was small and unremarkable looking, but the implications were staggering. A species that could instantly share information across their entire population would indeed be capable of incredible adaptations. The combined intelligence of billions of individuals working together would be a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Moore Dunn leaned back in his seat, his massive form suddenly seeming smaller than before. So when you say you survived Earth, he said slowly, you mean your entire species working together developed the technology and knowledge necessary to not just survive but thrive on the ultimate Deathworld. Exley Day One replied, and his calm confidence was starting to make sense to the aliens. For the first time, individual humans may look fragile, but we represent the collective survival wisdom of billions of beings who have spent their entire evolutionary history conquering the most hostile environment in known space. The silence that followed was different from the mocking quiet that had greeted Day One arrival. This was the silence of predators who had suddenly realized they were looking at something far more dangerous than themselves. The aliens who had considered themselves the galaxy elite survivors were beginning to understand that they had been playing in the minor leagues. Commander Vextar was the first to voice what they were all thinking. If Earth is truly as hostile as you describe, he said, his crystal voice barely audible, then every human is essentially a graduate of the most advanced survival training program in the galaxy. Day One nodded, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he looked around at the assembled aliens with something that might have been sympathy. And Earth, he said quietly, is actually going through one of its more peaceful periods right now. The shock that rippled through the Galactic Council chamber was unlike anything these hardened survivors had ever experienced, but Day One was far from finished with his revelations. The aliens who had spent their lives conquering individual Deathworlds were about to learn what it meant to master an entire planet that was actively trying to kill everything on it. What truly amazes other species when they study Earth Day, Juan continued with that same calm tone that was becoming increasingly unsettling, is not just that humans survived our hostile environment, but that we spread to every single biome and climate zone on the entire planet. Most species evolved to handle one specific type of environment, but humans live everywhere, Commander Vextar. Crystal form flickered with confusion as he tried to process this information. His own species had taken millions of years to adapt to the crystal environments of their homeworld, and even then they could only survive in areas with specific mineral compositions. The idea of a single species thriving in multiple environments seemed impossible. We have permanent settlements in regions where the temperature regularly drops below -50 degrees Celsius, Day One explained casually as if describing a minor detail. Communities of humans live and work in conditions that would freeze most alien species solid within minutes. They hunt massive predators across frozen wastelands and build entire cities on ice that never melts. Captain Mordun, who prided himself on heat resistance, felt his confidence crumbling even further. Other human communities live in desert regions where surface temperatures exceed 70 degrees Celsius and water is so scarce that a single mistake means death by dehydration. They have learned to find water sources in seemingly barren landscapes and survive for days without any liquid intake. Queen Zillera, compound eyes, focused intently on the human as she tried to understand the scope of what he was describing. A species that could survive in both extreme cold and extreme heat was already beyond anything in her experience, but Day One was just getting started with his explanations. Humans live on the highest mountains on our planet, Day One continued, where the air is so thin that most species would suffocate within minutes. The atmospheric pressure at those altitudes is less than 1/3 of what exists at sea level, and the temperature can drop to lethal levels without warning. Yet human communities exist there permanently. Several aliens made involuntary sounds of distress as they tried to imagine surviving in such conditions. Atmospheric pressure that low would cause most alien biologies to literally expand until their cellular structures failed. The idea of choosing to live in such an environment was incomprehensible. We also live in the deepest valleys and underground cave systems where no sunlight ever reaches, Day One said. Some human communities have adapted to live in complete darkness, developing enhanced senses and navigation abilities that allow them to thrive in environments where most species would become hopelessly lost. Human paused and looked around at the increasingly disturbed alien faces, but perhaps most impressively, humans have conquered the oceans themselves. We have built floating cities that can survive the massive storms I mentioned earlier. Mobile communities that harvest food from the sea while dodging predators that can swallow small spacecraft. Whole Commander Vextar found his voice again, but it was weak and uncertain. How is such adaptability possible, he asked. Your species lacks the specialized biological adaptations that would be necessary for such diverse environments. No species can survive everywhere without evolutionary changes that take millions of years. That brings me to the most important point about human survival, Day One replied, and there was something in his expression that made every alien in the chamber pay very close attention. We do not rely on biological adaptation because that process is too slow for Earth survival requirements. Instead, we develop something far more powerful and dangerous. He reached into his pack and pulled out several small objects that looked unremarkable but somehow made the assembled predators uncomfortable. These are tools, he explained, simple devices that allow humans to survive in any environment. By modifying our immediate surroundings instead of waiting for our biology to change, Day One held up what appeared to be a piece of cloth. This material can insulate against extreme cold or reflect away extreme heat depending on how it is used. It weighs almost nothing, takes up minimal space, and can mean the difference between life and death in dozens of different situations. Several aliens leaned forward to examine the seemingly ordinary fabric, but Day One was already showing them other items. This device purifies water, removing toxins and biological contaminants That would kill most species. This one generates heat or cooling as needed. This small container holds enough concentrated nutrition to sustain a human for days. Queen Zill-era mandibles clicked rapidly as she began to understand the implications. These were not just tools, they were portable adaptations that could be modified and improved far faster than any biological evolution. A species that could change its capabilities through technology, rather than genetics, would indeed be formidable. But the real power of human adaptability, Day One continued, is not in our individual tools, but in how we share knowledge and improve our methods. Every human who survives a new challenge shares that information with the entire species within years, or even months. Solutions to new problems spread across our entire global population. He activated the communication device he had shown earlier, and images appeared in the air above it showing human settlements in dozens of different environments. Arctic research stations where humans studied the frozen wastelands, desert cities built to withstand sandstorms and extreme heat, floating platforms that rode out oceanic storms that could destroy mountains. Captain Mordun stared at the images in growing amazement but also fear. These were not temporary shelters or emergency survival situations. These were permanent communities of humans who had not just adapted to hostile environments, but had turned them into places where their species could thrive and grow when humans encounter a new type of environment. Day One explained, "We do not send individual warriors to prove their strength like your survival challenges. Instead, we send teams of specialists who study every aspect of the environment, identify all potential threats, and develop comprehensive solutions that any human can use." The aliens exchanged worried glances as they realized the full implications of what they were hearing. Instead of individual heroes proving their worth through personal suffering, humans approached survival as a species-wide scientific problem to be solved through cooperation and shared knowledge. Our entire planet is essentially a laboratory for survival techniques. Day One continued. Every environment, every predator, every weather pattern, every natural disaster becomes a learning opportunity that makes our entire species more capable. The challenges that nearly destroyed your greatest warriors are the everyday conditions that we use to train our children. Commander Vex Tar crystal form was now barely glowing at all as he processed this information. A species that treated survival challenges as educational opportunities rather than tests of individual prowess would indeed develop capabilities beyond anything the galaxy had seen. And because Earth never stops presenting new challenges, Day One said, with something that might have been pride, humans never stop developing new solutions. We have become a species of professional survivors who treat the conquest of hostile environments as our primary occupation. The silence in the chamber was now complete as every alien struggled to understand what they were dealing with. These were not just survivors, these were beings who had turned survival itself into a science and an art form. The implications for the galaxy were staggering. Queen Zilera finally found her voice, but it was barely a whisper. "How many humans are there?" she asked. "How large is this population of ultimate survivors?" Day One smiled, and the expression was no longer mysterious. It was genuinely terrifying. "Current population is approaching 8 billion individuals," he said calmly, "all of them trained from birth to survive on the most hostile world in known space, all of them connected through global communication networks, all of them ready to share their knowledge and work together to overcome any challenge." The number hit the aliens like a physical blow. 8 billion survivors, each one equipped with the accumulated knowledge of their entire species, each one capable of adapting to any environment through technology and cooperation, each one representing a level of survival expertise that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever produced. Now Day One concluded his revelation. Humans are beginning to explore space. The final silence that descended upon the Galactic Council chamber was unlike anything these beings had ever experienced. It was not the silence of respect or even fear, but the profound quiet that comes when an entire worldview collapses and reality reshapes itself into something completely new and terrifying. Commander Vextar was the first to speak, and his crystal voice carried none of its former pride or confidence. "I have spent 3 centuries believing that surviving Shatter Prime for 3 days made me one of the galaxy's greatest warriors," he said slowly, his crystalline form barely glowing in the chamber light. but you are telling us that every human child grows up facing challenges that make my greatest achievement look like. A pleasant afternoon walk. Day 1 nodded calmly, and his expression showed neither mockery nor pity, just the patient understanding of someone explaining a simple fact to those who had never encountered it before. Human children play games that would be considered advanced survival training by most galactic standards, he confirmed. We teach them to recognize dangerous weather patterns, identify poisonous plants and animals, navigate by natural landmarks, and work together to solve problems that could kill them if they make mistakes. The implications of this hit the assembled aliens like a series of physical blows. An entire species where even the youngest members possessed survival skills that exceeded most military training programs in the galaxy was beyond anything they had imagined possible. Captain Moore Dunn leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber as he struggled to process what he was hearing. You mentioned that Earth is going through a peaceful period, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What did you mean by that? What could be worse than the conditions you have already described? Day 1 expression grew thoughtful, as if he was trying to figure out how to explain something very complex to beings who lack the necessary frame of reference. Currently, Earth is in what we call an interglacial period, he began. A relatively warm, stable time between major ice ages that have regularly reshaped our entire planet throughout our species' evolution. He gestured as if describing something in the air before him. During ice ages, most of our planet's surface is covered by glaciers. Several kilometers thick, the sea levels drop by over 100 meters. Entire continents become uninhabitable, and the surviving human populations are forced into small refuges, where they must compete with megafauna for resources. Queen Zill Era mandibles clicked rapidly as she tried to imagine surviving planetary-scale glaciation events that lasted for thousands of years. Her own species had never faced anything approaching that level of environmental catastrophe. The idea of an entire planet regularly becoming uninhabitable was genuinely terrifying. We have also survived what geologists call mass extinction events. Day 1 continued casually. Asteroid impacts that created global winter conditions for decades. Supervolcanic eruptions that filled our atmosphere with toxic gases and ash. Gamma ray bursts from dying stars that stripped away portions of our atmosphere and created radiation levels that would sterilize most worlds. Several aliens made involuntary sounds of distress as they realized that humans had not only survived planetary disasters that would have ended most civilizations, but had done so multiple times throughout their evolutionary history. Each extinction event had apparently made them stronger rather than destroying them. The current peaceful period will not last forever, Day 1 said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing predictable weather patterns. Our scientists estimate that we are overdue for several different types of global catastrophes, any one of which would require our entire species to adapt quickly or face extinction. Commander Vextar crystal form flickered uncertainly as he asked the question that every alien in the chamber was thinking, and humans are prepared for these future disasters. Day 1 smiled, and this time the expression was unmistakably predatory. We are not just prepared, he said, we are actively planning. For them, human civilization is designed around the assumption that major catastrophes will occur regularly and that survival depends on being ready to adapt quickly to completely new conditions. He activated his communication device again, and new images appeared showing massive underground facilities, orbital stations that could house millions of people, and technology that seemed impossibly advanced. These are just some of our preparation projects, he explained. Backup civilizations that can function independently if our main population centers are destroyed. The images shifted to show humans working in environments that look like other planets. Desert research stations that resembled alien worlds, underwater cities that could survive if the surface became uninhabitable, orbital habitats that could support human populations in space for generations. Captain Moore Dunn stared at the images with growing horror and fascination. You are telling us that humans plan to survive the destruction of entire civilizations, he said slowly, that your species treats the end of the world as a temporary inconvenience to be overcome through preparation and technology. That is exactly what I'm telling you, Day 1 confirmed, and his Calm confidence was now truly terrifying to beings who had never considered such possibilities. Humans do not just survive, we endure, we adapt, we overcome. And we never stop preparing for the next challenge, Queen Zillara finally asked the question. That had been growing in every alien mind since day one began his revelations. What does this mean for the rest of the galaxy, she whispered. What happens when 8 billion ultimate survivors begin exploring space and encountering worlds that are gentle by their standards? Day one looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens, and for the first time since entering, he seemed to truly see them as individuals rather than representatives of alien species. When humans encounter the volcanic worlds that challenge your greatest warriors, he said quietly, those environments will seem pleasantly warm and stable compared to Earth. He paused, and his expression grew thoughtful. The acid swamps that nearly killed Queen Zillara will be seen as interesting biological laboratories where humans can study extremophile organisms. The crystal storms that scarred Commander Vex, Tar will be viewed as mild weather that requires only basic protective equipment. The terrible truth was sinking in. For every alien present, humans would not be challenged by the Deathworlds that had tested the galaxy's greatest survivors. They would be disappointed by how easy those worlds